Wild times, wild times. To help us unpack it all, we are delighted to welcome in our good friend Rafa Honigstein. Hello, Rafa. How are you?
Hello, I'm very well. How are you?
We are fantastic. Let's chat about some of these storylines on the final match day of the Bundesliga season. For you, because there's a lot we could talk about, which storyline was the most remarkable on this last day?
Well, of course, we talked about Leverkusen doing it unbeaten for a few times. But I think in terms of the perhaps most unexpected turn of events, I would say Stuttgart finishing ahead of Bayern. In a way, it hasn't come as a huge surprise because we saw Bayern struggle throughout the season. We saw Stuttgart do really well. But if anyone would have told you at the beginning of the season that Stuttgart would finish ahead of Bayern in the table, they would have laughed at you. Leverkusen winning the title was already unrealistic enough, but it was perhaps feasible. But Stuttgart relegation, playing Stuttgart from a year ago, finishing ahead of Bayern, I think that was a pretty remarkable turn of events. And at the same time, totally deserved. Stuttgart were the second best team in Bundesliga, which just goes to show how far Bayern have fallen down the pecking order.
Rafa, could you put into perspective this Bayer Leverkusen accomplishment of going unbeaten for the whole season? Where do you compare them in terms of past Bayern Munich, great teams of winning Champions League? Because, you know, even if they were to go the whole season unbeaten, and we're talking in all competitions, and they win the Europa League, is that the best German team of all time? Or would you still say, because they didn't win the Champions League, I can't give them that claim?
I think if teams do the treble and win the Champions League, the Bundesliga, and the Cup, it's harder to see a team going unbeaten and winning two cups, one of them the slightly lesser competition, as being equals. Also, I think when we talk about the greatest teams ever, we talk about teams that have gone to 3 or 4 years of dominance. You know, we're thinking about Bayern Munich in the 70s. We're thinking of Borussia Mönchengladbach in the late 70s, Hamburg in the 80s, Bayern, of course, in the 90s, and then you had a spell of Dortmund in the 90s, and then under Klopp. But certainly as a season isolated, if we just look at the league, I think we can easily say that Leverkusen have been the best Bundesliga side that we've ever seen. Now, you might argue if you're Pep Guardiola and say, well, we won more points, and we only started losing because we were already champions and we couldn't quite keep our motivation up because we're still chasing the Champions League. It was easier because maybe the Europa League wasn't as taxing, but I would say it's probably on safe ground to say, in terms of the league form, in terms also where they have come from, this has been the most impressive league performance of a German team ever. And that is a big claim to make after 60-odd seasons in the Bundesliga. And some people will say, okay, we are a little bit influenced by what has just happened and maybe forget about the past, but I think Leverkusen deserve to be in that conversation for sure.
Rafa, I was having this debate with friends of mine over the weekend. Let's just say they do win the Pokal, they do in the Europa League, and they go undefeated. As a season, I think the word you're using, and not the best team ever, but is it the single best season in European football, period?
I would still rate a Champions League win higher. Of course, to go unbeaten in 3 competitions and win them all is just is something that doesn't happen in modern football, where the margins tend to be so low, and even the best sides have no guarantee of winning, especially in cups where you need a bit of luck. I would still rate the Champions League a little bit higher if you've won the treble. But look, we're talking about splitting hairs here. I think Leverkusen deserve to be in the conversation with the teams who have won the bigger treble, if you will, courtesy of going unbeaten in the league. I think that has elevated their league already. Whether that takes them beyond the likes of Juventus and Bayern and Manchester United, I'm not quite so sure. But I think they are in good company with these kind of teams, and they deserve to be mentioned alongside them.
Rafa, I'm sure over the past 11 years previous to the season, you've heard the talk, you've heard the chatter about Bundesliga being boring and the same storyline over and over again with Bayern winning and people maybe potentially not being as interested in Bundesliga. Talk to me about the shift in perspective you've seen this year. You've got an absolutely amazing undefeated season from Bayern Leverkusen. You've got 2 teams in European finals. You've got 7 teams heading to European competition next year. How different is the conversation? What do you feel about the future of Bundesliga right now?
I mean, when you have a season that Heidenheim finishes in European places, you know that this is hasn't been an ordinary season. And then you add Leverkusen, and you add potentially 6 German teams in the Champions League, certainly 5. Dortmund with a chance to win the Champions League, Leverkusen with a chance to go all the way in all 3 competitions. And it's been a historic season already, whatever happens. Remarkable season. Bayern's dominance broken, a real freshness, a real sense of surprise and excitement about this league that I think the league needed. I think from a German perspective, we always say, what does it matter if one team wins all the time? Because we as Germans, we have our teams and we're not going to stop supporting our team just because another team wins. I mean, nobody in the Premier League will say, you know what, it's been boring with Man City, I'm just going to stop watching Arsenal games or Liverpool. And in Germany, it's the same. But of course, from an outside perspective, people who look for the excitement, who look for storylines, who look for change and a bit of competitiveness, it's been a godsend. And I think I made this point on the show before. I think even for Bayern themselves, it's a good thing to happen because you can get lazy. You can get a little bit complacent. You can get a little bit satisfied in the wrong sense. And they need to freshen things up. And Leverkusen have done that for them. They will push them again next season. And the whole league will be much better for it.
Rafa, you touched on Stuttgart being such a surprise storyline in the Bundesliga this season, finishing ahead of Bayern in second place. What does that mean for Sebastian Hoeneß? Do you see him having a big future? Is he going to be with Stuttgart after having such an incredible season? And Guirassy had a phenomenal strike rate this year. Do you see him staying with Stuttgart? Because it was rumored that he was going to leave Stuttgart around the January transfer window.
Yeah, I think they'll do really well to hold on to Guirassy. He's got a release clause that's very affordable. I think there'll be a lot of teams interested in him. And of course, Stuttgart have a bit of money coming in from the Champions League, but I think they're going to be smart and not spend it all on either attracting new players or keeping old ones around, because it's no guarantee that they will finish again in the Champions League places. And suddenly you find yourself with a very expensive squad and no means to refinance that. So I think that might work against them a little bit, their prudence, if you will. And we'll have to see about Guirassy. I think Hoeneß is going places. He had already an offer or the possibility, I think, to make a bigger move this summer. Bayern Munich, of course, were in the market, or are still in the market for a new manager. I think his last name worked a little bit against him in that respect. His uncle is the big boss there. His father is an important figure behind the scenes as well at Bayern. So I think he'll probably need a couple more years at this level before he can make the step up. But certainly he's done enough already with Stuttgart to suggest that this is a top manager in the making. And I think the fact that he extended his contract, committed himself, also shows great judgment on his behalf that you don't necessarily immediately want to leverage your good season and move on, but actually learn on the job, keep going a bit, also know what it's like to have a bad season, because let's face it, it's going to be hard for Stuttgart to repeat what they did this year, especially with the Champions League coming up. So I think all these things will stand him in good stead going forward, and I think he's going to be one of the best German managers in years to come.
Great stuff. Rafa, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning. Hopefully we'll catch up with you very soon. I hope you get a nice little break for a bit.
No break, but thank you very much.